going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 cards coming out of Flames of Destruction. With the sneak peek this upcoming weekend and the official release the week after, I thought it's the perfect opportunity to share with you guys what my personal favorite cards are coming out of the set. So I know we have all different opinions, but I'd love to hear what cards you're looking forward to as well down in the comments below. But before we get into that, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you guys don't miss a single video. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting off with number 5, we have Altergeist Multifaker. Altergeist Multifaker is one of those cards that can take an entire archetype and bring it into the competitive spotlight. Basically in the OCG, as soon as Flames of Destruction hit, Altergeist became a tier 1 to tier 1.5 deck, basically overnight, and that's absolutely crazy. I've always had the theory that if you give any deck a pseudo version of Spiral Double Helix that essentially is in theme with the archetype, it's gonna make the deck almost just an absolute contender and really bring it into the competitive forefront. And Altergeist Multifaker is that card for the Altergeist archetype. It works in tandem with all the trap cards that Altergeist produces. It basically just special summons any Altergeist monster out of the deck. Sure, it limits you from doing some plays, but it doesn't matter because the deck is a very good control deck, and I wouldn't be surprised if this deck becomes a tier 2, if not a tier 1 contender when Flames of Destruction becomes legal. So it's just an all-around amazing card. It's kind of the archetypal support that you really want to see for any of your favorite archetypes that might not be competitive, and I really wish Konami did more of this for other archetypes. I think it'd be cool to just pretty much inject archetypes with this kind of necessary support, and I feel that Altergeist Multifaker is a perfect example of that. Now this moves us on to number 4, and that's going to be Topologic Trisbania. Now, Topologic Trisbania is such a cool card because it's a generic Link 3, it just requires 2+ effect monsters, I believe. It has Link arrows like Decode Talker, which aren't the best, but also aren't the worst. As long as 2 are pointing in your direction, it's totally fine. And having 1 point towards them also isn't terrible, since Topologic Trisbania's effect has it that if a monster is special summoned to an arrow that it points to, it's not only going to banish that monster, but it's going to banish all spell and trap cards on the field, and your opponent's going to take damage. So it's kind of like the spell or trap equivalent to Topologic Bomber Dragon. Now, the big thing is here, this is going to be a very difficult card for back row heavy decks to deal with, like Altergeist, Paleozoic. Hell, even True Draco might have some difficulty dealing with this card because not only is it destroying all their back row, but it's banishing all of it, meaning they're not going to be able to get the added value off of having their back row hit the graveyard. If the Paleozoic monsters get banished, or if the True Draco spells and traps don't manage to hit the graveyard, they're not only going to not get the value from it, but they're going to really just hold those strategies back from being able to compete. And because Trisbania is a generic Link 3 for the most part, that's what makes it so appealing, because you can essentially put this in any deck that's capable of making Link 3s, and now you have kind of a good toolbox out to being able to handle these back row heavy decks. So I think this is a very welcome addition, and I'm really curious to see the impact that Trisbania is going to have once it becomes officially released. Now this moves us on to number 3, and for number 3, I've got Nightmare Griffin, but realistically, I have all of the Nightmare cards kind of bundled into this category. I'm really excited for this archetype because it's not very often that we get archetypes that are so easily toolboxed. I'm very much so a fan of decks that have extra decks that basically can do anything in any situation. That's why I loved Burning Abyss, that's why I love Zodiac, and Nightmares, not only do they have this advantage, but they're also, because they're so generic and pretty much can be splashed into any deck, they're not held back by being able to be played in a singular given archetype. This is where the creativity of the player base is really going to shine, because without having Crystron Needle Fiber and not having Summon Sorcerers for several months after the release of Flames of Destruction, I'm really curious to see what the player base is going to come up with to figure out the best strategies for being able to abuse these nightmares. So the fact that that any deck can incorporate these into their extra deck means they're going to have the tools necessary to handle any given situation. I mean, you have monster removal, you've got spell and trap removal, you've got an extra normal summon, you've got a card that can spin any card back into the deck, and then you have a big beefy boss monster that basically makes it so that your opponent can't use the effects of any monsters unless they're linked. And in tandem all together, that's just crazy when you think about it, that a toolbox of monsters can be this powerful. I can't wait to see what people come up with. Maybe we'll see some crazy World Chalice builds, or maybe some people will find a way to make like ABC or these other decks really work without Needle Fiber or Summon Sorceress. It's going to be a challenge, but I'm sure someone's going to eventually figure it out. Now that moves us on to number 2, and we have Infinite Impermanence. Now, I have to say, I highly underestimated Infinite Impermanence when I first talked about this card, but I wasn't looking at Infinite Impermanence in context of the current game. The reason why this card is so appealing is because on paper, yeah, it's an effect veiler in the form of a trap card, so why would you want to play one over the other? But the reason that that's so appealing is that because it's a trap card actually has a very strong advantage, and that advantage is the fact that it's not going to lose to something like Called by the Grave. All of the hand traps when they hit the graveyard are susceptible to being negated by Called by the Grave, but Infinite Impermanence doesn't have that same weakness. So that makes it very appealing because as the format progresses, Called by the Grave is only going to become more and more popular, and so that means that Infinite Impermanence is going to become that much more of a likely candidate to be used over hand traps. Now, aside from being an effect veiler, its second effect is also pretty nifty as well. It's kind of reliant on your opponent playing into it because it negates all cards in a single column, and while that's a little bit iffy because they need to play the cards in those columns, it's really cool because it can also hit spells and traps, and I think that's really, really neat. What's also cool about it as well is it doesn't have to be used in response to something like an effect activating, so you can use Infinite Impermanence to negate something like a Vanity's Fiend, a Majesty's Fiend, or something that's basically floodgating you that's on your opponent's field. So that has a very strong advantage as well, and we haven't really seen a card like that outside of realistically using a board wipe. So having a card that we can play as a 3 of that can kind of work around those floodgate monsters, I think is going to be a boon moving forward for any deck that they're going to want to have in either their main or their side deck. Now, with Infinite Impermanence being my number 2, you guys are probably curious as to what I have for number 1, but before we get into that, I do want to go ahead and mention the honorable mention, and that card is World Legacy Secession. Now, to talk about this briefly, it's basically Monster Reborn as long as you control a Link monster, because it just has to be special summoned to a zone that a Link monster is pointing to. It may only be once per turn, but having another extender like that, especially if your deck is very heavily Link focused, I think is absolutely incredible. I completely forgot to talk about this card in my set analysis because I didn't realize we were getting it in this set, but I think this is a really, really cool card and something you're definitely going to want to look out for. So, for my number 1 card out of Flames of Destruction, if you haven't already figured it out, it's Red Reboot. Now, Red Reboot is a card I have been looking forward to ever since I heard that this card was coming into existence. One of the biggest gripes I had about competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the fact that there are certain trap cards like Dimensional Barrier that literally had no counterplay whatsoever because they are a chainable trap card. They had a persistent effect that even if you stopped the card or if you destroyed it, the effect was still going to linger and you weren't going to be able to do anything about it. Red Reboot solves that problem, and yeah, I know we had Herald of Purple Light, but fuck that. That's not like an actual out. Red Reboot is the out that I have been waiting for. The fact that you can activate this card from your hand by paying half your life points, the fact that it is a counter trap, meaning the only realistic way your opponent can stop this card is Solemn Judgment or a Red Reboot of their own. But what's so cool about this too is that this takes aggro decks to an entirely new level, because now these decks that have very high OTK potential can max out on copies of Red Reboot depending on the matchup and basically just shut down any chance of their plays getting stopped by trap cards. And the fact that it is a counter trap, it's so easily played, it uses half your life points, which means you're basically always going to be able to activate it. This is the card I have been wanting for so long now. I could not be more excited for it, and realistically, it had to make the #1 slot. It's only a super rare too, like that's what's blowing my mind. I was sure they were gonna rarity bump this card into secret rare just because of how powerful it truly is, and if you guys aren't aware of that, you're gonna know Red Reboot's force soon enough. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what your guys' top cards are coming out of Flames of Destruction. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.